Okay, do you see my screen or I have to share again?
I guess you have to share again.
Okay.
It's not this.
Okay, all right, let me do that.
Okay. Thanks.
Bless, you are welcome. Okay, so Zainab, I guess you can see the screen now.
Table of contents.
Okay, all right, exactly. That's what I want to show. So let's go down to review. So as you can see, these are the objectives of this particular work: to examine the effect of firm-specific factors and employee performance. So the effect of those factors, such as this, on performance. So we'll definitely have to review on performance as part of our literature review. And then we also want to explore the causal relationship between capital structure and firm performance. Okay, so we will have to review on capital structure and then performance. So performance is already captured in the first objective. So, and then we also want to investigate the reactions of firms' performance to shocks in innovation in capital structure. So if you go to the literature review side, chapter 2, as I said, this is the introduction. You just have to give a brief introduction of your chapter, and then you start with the theoretical side. I told you we have 2 sections. That's the 2 major sections, and each section is broken down into basic or simpler form. Now, the theoretical handles everything that has to do with concepts, that has to do with definitions, that has to do with the main theories or the models itself. Handle the theoretical. It's theoretical because mostly when you hear somebody say, oh, we are not interested in theories, I say things that has to do with just talking. There's no practicality. You get it? So it's based on people's opinion, people's thinking, people's ideas. That is why we refer to them as theoretical. It has no practical basis. So when we're done, that's where we talk about the practical aspects. For instance, the theories of human, whatever, maybe human behavior, theories of demand. It is things that people have sat down to think through. They think through and try to come out with what their own opinion. It is not mostly backed by applications. Do you get it? So that is why sometimes those theories could fail because they are not practical. But maybe with the test of time, we try to modify and experience. Sometimes even after some time, we try to discard those theories because they don't work anymore. So we refer to them as theoretical because we are only referring to opinions and thoughts and ideas that people have on the topic you are dealing with. Okay, so I talked about the concept of capital structure and look at how it is done. So for instance, capital structure refers to the combination of debt and equity securities used in settlement of real investment. Now, definitely, this is not exactly how the person wrote it, but I am not supposed to give exact writing from the word to word. No, I put it in my own words and quote someone or quote a reference to support it. You see, so, and then the rest follows. So it's like you are narrating a story, and each information that you give, you will need to back it with sources. All right, so that is how the theoretical side is done. And this is part of the theoretical types of capital structure. You are doing all these things because you would want to ensure that whoever that is reading your piece understands and can follow, or whoever that is reading knows what you are about, or you are proving that you really know what you are about. You are not novel in the field. You understand the concept. You understand what is the whole thing about what you are talking of. You get it. So you are proving a point. All right. So I talked about the factors that determine capital structure, because all these factors are necessary, because definitely we in our objectives we wanted to know how those affect performance. So at least we should have an idea or overview of the factors involved. And then the concept of performance, as I told you earlier, is part of our objectives to study performance. So you can't just study performance and bring results on it without making a review of what performance actually is. So you talk about performance and give references. You talk about it and give references. Then, what are the indicators of performance? Because if you go back to the objective, the first objective was to find out how all these indicators, how capital structure affect this performance, and we are measuring performance based on certain indicators. So we will need to refresh our minds on how people have been measuring performance. What indicators do they use? So after getting to know each of these indicators, then it gives a justification that you didn't just select the indicators at all, but it is rooted in what? Principles. Your indicators that you chose have basics. Okay, so we talk about employee performance indicators, talk about the relationship between capital structure and performance. There might be certain concepts and theories and books that talk about how they affect performance. So you need to relate all these ones. Okay. Then, as I said, theories, the main theories of, so the first theory was the pecking order theory. Yeah, so you talk about it, you give the overview of the theory. You link it, maybe you give the assumptions, its benefits and limitations, and how it links to the work you are doing. Yeah, so that part could be done in just a paragraph. So as many theories as you want, then you link them. You just do the same procedure and then link them. Then we've come to the empirical side. This is where I wanted to talk of, the empirical review. And for the sake of those who join late, I'm saying that empirical talks about practical works that people have done. They have taken time to go to the field or use data, whether primary or secondary, made the analysis and come up with some findings. So any work that has those components is referred to as empirical. Okay. So I also talked about the procedures I will use to start with the empirical. I will get my materials down and put my empirical review under subheadings based on the objective. So for instance, capital structure and then performance. So I've given one subheading to capital structure. So I'll review all empirical works on capital structure. Then another subheading here on firm performance. So I'll review all works on firm performance, all work that people have done on firm performance, and the relationship between capital structure. So if you can really relate this, you realize that each of these subheadings have something to do with my objectives. And that is the trait. You don't review things that are different or are way away from your objective. No, it should be in line with your objectives. Okay. And then I also wanted to talk about causality. So I've reviewed works on causality. And then impulse response. All these are quite technical though, but as part of the objectives that I wanted to find the reactions or the impulse reactions. So I'll review works on impulse response. And then I give a summary. So before we come to the summary, let's go and start with the empirical. How I did it, or how I went about my empirical. Okay, so I've told you what empirical review is about. It's left with how we are going to do it. Because knowing what it's about is different from knowing how it is done. And in doing it, there are a lot of skills that you need to demonstrate. You should be able to demonstrate your summary skills, because you are going to summarize the works of people. So let me go back to show you this particular folder. Let me see if let me show you the folder. Okay, let me share my screen again. I guess you can see, please. So for instance, if you come to this folder, okay, I have chapters and I have references. So I go to references. You know, let me remind you that if you are doing any research work and you mess up with your references, as in you don't put them together well right from the beginning, you are doomed. You are doomed, because it will get to a time that you will need to attach those references and you wouldn't know how to get them. So right from beginning, everything should be organized. Create a folder for your references, and every material you use, try and store it in it. So this is empirical references that I used. So if you can see, you know, all the empirical subheadings that I mentioned, I've created a folder for each of them. And let's start with the first folder. For instance, capital structure. If I open capital structure, I'll have a list of all the materials I used for capital structure. I have my own way of naming them. So I used 1, 2, 3, and I know what it means. So if I really want to trace it, I know that 1 belongs to the first reference here, raining 2019. As you can see, raining. Okay, so first of all, for me to review this particular article, I'll get most of the information from the abstract. Most of the information from the abstract, all that I need. Because if you look at this particular work, for instance, he has stated the objective, he has stated the methods that was used, and he has stated the findings. And that is all I need to review this work. That's all I need to review. So in a case where all these things are not stated in the abstract, then immediately or quickly you need to scroll through and check where you can find them. You see, the reason is you can't waste so much time on a particular, because my work, for instance, I use about close to 80 references, and each of these material has about at least 20 to 30 pages. So would I have the time to look at these things? No, I don't have that time. So mostly I just copy. So to start with, I just copy the abstract for all of them. Then I get time to now what? Sift through and put them in my own words and make them better. I don't just start by making it better. No, first I have to copy them. So I'll copy the first one, put it down, enter space, copy the second one. So I'll copy all the 10 or 13 materials. Then when I finish, I go back from the first one and start to make sense or read and put it well. Okay, so that's how I go about mine, and you can use the same method. So let's go back to the main work. Let me share the empirical side for you to see. No, not this one. Okay. Okay, so the empirical review. You know, research is dynamic, and you can use your own style that you feel to make the style you think will help people to easily understand and flow with you. Because for a good writing, it should be comprehensive, as in whoever reads it should be able to understand, and it should make sense, and it should be effective. So any style that you feel you can adapt, go ahead. So for instance, to start with the empirical review, I decided to make sure that I give a brief of whatever it is. So for instance, I'm trying to convince that a review of empirical literature in this study is essential for helping to establish the geographical coverage and topical issues that have been empirically investigated on capital structure. It also helps in determining the possible variables that have been explored, the approaches employed, and the conclusions that have been drawn from empirical findings. This is paramount in directing the focus of the studies. Therefore, this section covers empirical reviews that highlight on capital structure determinants, firm performance indicators, the relationship between capital structure and firm performance, causality analysis, and impulse response analysis of capital structure are shown in section. So I just list all the sections that will follow. So I start with capital structure, and then I start as Rainy 2019, mostly because this one is starting, it should be rather this way. When the reference is starting or is in the middle of the sentence, it's only the year that should be in brackets. Okay, all right. So, but when it is at the end, you put the whole thing in bracket. Example is this one. Let me show you some. An example is this one. You know, this one is at the end because of the full stop. So I put all in brackets, the person's name, and then the year it was done. Okay. Okay, so I just want you to look at the flow. So this whole part is for Rainy, this whole thing. So if you are really following me, it is that long PDF that has been summarized into this small paragraph. That is the essence of review. You are summarizing the work, but in your summary, we should know what the work is about, as in the reason behind conducting that work, and then the methods, the results, and the findings. So Rainy examines the variables that affect capital structure and speed of adjustment towards the target capital structure firms. So I got this from the objective. The study was conducted with the generalized method of moments model and two-stage least squares. So this was the methods they used. A panel data consisting of 3,310 Indian firms were used, with the data spanning 2000 to 2018. So this was how the sample size they use, and then the period that the study covered. Also, a fully modified ordinary least square technique was used to shed light on the dynamic nature of the adjustment process. So this one also tells you more about the methods. So the findings indicate that the JAM estimate confirm Indian firms adjust their capital structure at the benchmark of this. So we are talking about what the findings are. So if you are really following the structure, you realize that we started with the objectives. We talked about the methods that were used, and then now we are talking about the findings. So you do same for all the articles that you want to review for this particular subheading. So for each of them, let's know the objectives, and definitely you get the objective from the summary, the abstract. By reading the abstract, a good abstract will tell you that this was the reason why they conducted the study, and this was the method they used, and this is the findings that they came up with. So I used the same procedure for all of them, and then so I think I reviewed about 10 works under that subheading. So I came to a conclusion here. So after the subheading, I draw a summary. It starts from here. So after you review, as I said earlier, the review is not just to list have a long list of the empirical works. No, you have the empirical work and then you try to link it. Okay, so therefore this study plays a novel role as a test for, it should start from here. Okay, it starts from here. So my review comments. So after giving out what the works are, then I give my comments. However, none, I think it should even go beyond. Okay, it starts from here. So after reviewing under that subheading, I came to a conclusion here that this conclusion is just for that particular subheading. So I'll recommend that for each subheading, you give a brief of it, and then when you're done, you give a general summary of the whole literature review. So based on the studies on determinants of capital structure reviewed herein, the variables explored so far covers firm size, economic cycle, tax, ownership, ROA, that's return on asset, stocks, religious orientation, asymmetry information, agency costs, and so on and so forth. Okay. However, none of the studies explores the collective impact of both debt and equity on firm performance using return on asset and so on and so forth. Okay. Therefore, this study plays a novel role as it tests the joint impact of both equity and debt on the whole of organization's performance by considering both firm performance and employee performance variables at the same time. So what we're trying to say is that we've given the chance to review all those works, and then we have identified, so we are trying to say that now we know what has been explored so far. That is what was covered and what was not covered. And we are making a case that, because in research, you should prove that your work is novel, as in your ideas are new, as in you are bringing a new contribution on board. You are not just repeating what has been done. So after making a case of what has been done and what has been covered, you try to create the impact of the gaps. So what gaps have you identified? And what is your work now fulfilling to address those gaps? Are you getting the concept? So we don't just list materials like that, no. So by so doing, we have now synchronized the review into our main work. They now coordinate. Yeah. So I did the same for firm performance. I reviewed a lot of the articles and made my own summary. And then I went to the relationship. I reviewed a series of the articles that are addressing relationship between performance and capital structure. And then I come out with another summary. Okay. So after doing for all the subheadings, because initially I told you put them in subheadings, so you understand why the subheadings are there. Yeah, so you put on in subheading based on the objective. Then I did for impulse, and now a whole summary of the review. And this is very important. So I will take time to read all of this one. The summary is very important because it's going to communicate a certain message and give you an idea of how you should also go about your own work. So the summary. This chapter begins with a review of the relevant theoretical literature underpinning the study. This was followed by, now in academic writing, we are so much interested in using the right words. Okay, it shouldn't be big words per se, but the words should be mature. Like it should show some classy nature. You don't just write ordinarily like raw writing. No, use how do I put it? Use the right words. Okay, so this was followed by the empirical review of existing literature in line with the research aim and objectives. Both theoretical and empirical review reveal that the concept of capital structure has received the necessary attention from diverse aspects in geographical coverage. Several methods have also been used for arriving at diverse conclusions, of which some are contradicting. You see, you are trying to make a case. This implies that there is no consensus established in many aspects of capital structure studies. You see, you want to make a case to justify why your study is even important. Because at the end of it all, you acknowledge that some work has been done all right, good findings, a lot of insights. However, they fail to do certain things that needs to be done. Or however, there is a gap existing that needs to be done. Okay, so the most obvious gaps are that. So now I'm mentioning the gaps. And
please, can I ask a question?
Yes, please, you can.
Unfortunately, I was late. As I told you, my Sundays has always.
Sure, I get you, understand. Yeah.
But my question is that do you separate the theoretical review from the empirical review, or under each subheading, you can combine both the theoretical and then the empirical review under each subheading?
Okay, my response to this is that I said earlier that research is more of dynamism and is based on style. Okay, however, in thesis or dissertation, I recommend that you put them under separate headings. I recommend that. If it's an article for publication, you can do it any style that you want. But because mostly, for instance, let me show you my article. I don't think, but what I'm trying to say is that if it's an article, you have your own style. But if it is for thesis, the supervisors would want to see clearly the differences or the distinction. So unless otherwise recommended by your supervisor, but the most style that I use is that I separate the concepts from the theories itself and then the theories from the empirical side. So when you see that section, you realize that all these belong to empirical studies. Yeah, so once is, hey, it said I'm running out of time. Never mind. Yeah, so I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you've answered it. Thank you.
Okay, oh, you're welcome. Okay. Zoom is trying to tell me I'm running out of time, but we will still go through quickly. Okay. Okay, so now I've talked about what has been done. Now I'm moving on to show the huge gap existing. So the most obvious gaps are that, firstly, none of the studies explore the collective impact of both debt and equity on firm performance. So I'm making a case that though people are doing them separately, there is a need to join and study those aspects together. So, and none of the studies are doing that. So that's my first case. Okay, so, and customers are, okay. Secondly, the arguments by various researchers sometimes leads to contradictory findings, and hence there is no consensus in literature. This means that each specific variable must be studied within a specific context before drawing conclusions, and such conclusions cannot be generalized. So again, I'm trying to create a point that based on the contradictions in findings, it means that there is a need to study each case separately. So you can't study Germany or the financial industry and try to draw the conclusion that it happens to Ghana too. You get it? So it means Ghana's case needs to be studied differently, Germany also differently, and when it comes to, for instance, industries, manufacturing industry should be different, agri should be different, because each one gives its own findings. So you can't just generalize it. Okay, so that's the second point I made. And my third point is that there is no research that investigates the causal associations among firm size, return on asset, equity, and net profits in Ghana's oil industry. Then finally, no study by far determines how firms and employees' performance variables respond to shocks in equity and debt. So all these, so you should let whoever is reading know that you've identified 3 loopholes or 3 gaps, 2 gaps or 1 gap. Like, let them know that these are the gaps, okay, in a sequence. Okay, so the current study now, after identifying the gap, you should now try to link your study. What are you going to do to address those gaps? So first, you've reviewed and known what is there. 2, you have seen the gaps in literature. 3, what you are going to do in your studies to address those gaps. Okay. So the current study contributes to filling the gaps mentioned herein by using the grander causality, and so you are talking about what you are doing to fill those gaps. So at least each of the gaps that you have mentioned, you should be ready to address them. That is why you've listed them. Linear investigate interaction among capital structure, firm performance, and employee performance, and by using the vector autoregressive model to determine the response to innovations and shocks in capital structure. If you realize, we talked about all these things that they were not in literature, so each of them has been factored in the new study. Okay, so now my contribution. You don't necessarily write that this is the contribution, okay, but at least the paragraph should talk to itself, that when you read, the person will know this is what you are going to do. So you are proving that your work is new. The novelty of this study. So they want to see the gap, They want to see the novelty. They want to see those keywords. The novelty of this study lies in the fact that it is the only study that analyzes how capital structure decisions affect both firm and employee performance. If you realize, we are being consistent. We are being consistent with our case or with our argument. The consistency is very important. The consistency in our objectives, in the gaps we have identified, and then the novelty. They should be consistent, and they should be consistent with whichever subtopic that we have reviewed. Okay. Okay, so the novelty, we analyzing this employee performance. Okay, again, so if you have 2, 3, or 4 novelties, write all of them here. Again, the study is unique because it is the only study to first measure the response of firms' performance indicators to shocks in both equity and debt. The next chapter, so now you are trying to end by letting us know what follows. The next chapter develops the research methodology adopted to achieve the study objective. So when you go to the next chapter, you see the methodology. Okay, so that is the techniques that you need to employ in doing your literature review. We handled the references side some time ago. So it's assumed that we know how to do our references, and then the references are very much needed, especially in your literature review, because any slide thing you do, you might be misconstrued as plagiarism. It could be taken as you are deliberately trying to use people's ideas and opinions without making references to them. That might not even be the case. And as I say, you have to make sure and be careful that you try to limit direct words and direct quotations from by lifting from the works you are reviewing. You try to limit that, else you have a huge percentage in plagiarism tests. As much as possible, try to put everything in your own words as much as possible. Try to put everything in your main words, your own words. Okay, so if you have any question or view to share on literature review, please let's hear from you.
Thank you very much, Lee. Please, in your submission, I can see that your work is more like economics work.
Yeah.
What about the people among us who are not doing economics and their work are more of maybe descriptive in nature? How best can they also structure their literature review?
Okay, so the methods, in as to whether econometric or it's sociology or that only come into effect when we are dealing with the chapter 3 methodology aspect, because irrespective of the field, you will need to have the same concept, the same idea in your review, irrespective of the field, the same concept, because what matters most in the review is your objectives, because you are using the subcomponents in your objective and reviewing works under each of the subheadings. So for instance, if it is the theory aspect, the theory, instead of using economic theories, you are rather going to use theories that are related to your field. Do you get it? So for instance, instead of dealing with the human needs theory, maybe you can talk about psychological theories or sociological theories that you know that are important to your work. Okay, so in terms of definition and concept, you aren't going to define economic concept. You are going to define the concept that are in line with your study objectives. Okay, so that is how I can answer you.
Yeah, the reason why I asked the question is I was trying to discuss data review with a friend of mine. I think she was doing HR, and I was
Okay.
mentioning about data review, and I was pinpointing how people were using VAR and other stuff to do that. And